I would love to say that I'm completely altruistic and I'm doing it for,
Wouldn't we all?
for the family and for you and all of these kinds of things. But I need to get out of my way and be honest about it. It is really selfish in the sense of my achievement, my providing for my family, my reaching that mountaintop is how I reflect back to myself that I've done something in this world and that I mean something to this world. And that matters. There's nothing wrong with that, but I can't lie and say that I'm doing it for you.
Yeah. Today we're diving into what actually happens when your relationship and your work life collide.
Why the way you show up in your business can quietly create tension at home. How success, identity, and even your sense of self start getting tied into your relationship.
And what it really takes to navigate roles, power, and connection without losing each other in the process. I'm Emily Gough, a relationship coach. I've spent years exploring how we connect to grow and heal in love.
And I'm Kelly Gardner, an embodied leadership coach and communications consultant. Love isn't theory, it's practice.
This is Love in Practice.
Let's grow this. I had this great idea a couple weeks ago. At least I thought it was a great idea. And I brought it to my men's group. And I shared that this was going to be something that was so helpful for our marriage. So proud of this.
I'm already
I thought,
laughing.
Yeah. I thought, okay, here's what's going to happen. When I'm wearing the husband hat, I will be very clear in our relationship, I'm wearing the husband hat right now. I'm speaking to you as your husband. And then when we're working together on business, I will wear the business hat and I will say, I'm wearing the business hat now, Emily. And that will be super clear and we will be able to break those two things apart. And I brought this to my men's group and turns out I was a moron. It doesn't seem that my wife compartmentalizes information in the same way that I do. The married men who work with their partners were laughing at me. In this episode, I want to talk a little bit more about what happens when the roles that we play as partners who work together overlap with the roles that we play as husband and wife who live together, manage relationship dynamics, love, intimacy, and all of those things, how they sometimes overlap in ways that aren't always beneficial and sometimes can be beneficial.
And this is a journey that we are still very much undergoing.
So here we are, growing together in real time, in real moment, as we promised for you guys. This is our journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is an interesting one. And I get a lot of questions about it. Like, how do you two work together? And I'm like, oh, don't worry, there's bumps. There are bumps. Trust me.
Never.
It is definitely still very much a work in progress for us. Because we also both work from home and we work together and we live together. But business is business. And sometimes business needs to get done.
I do believe so.
Yes. And that's where things can get a little bit muddied because we both can have different ideas of what is important, what to prioritize, what to work on, while coming at what each of us are sharing with the other and wanting to potentially lead with from very different lenses, wildly different lenses. Sometimes that is actually quite beneficial. You get the opportunity to learn and grow from the other. And sometimes that just creates a lot of friction and clashing, which is tricky because then at the end of the business meeting, we still live together. We still have all the other things to navigate and manage and juggle.
Sure do.
Yep. So tell me what comes up for you the most in this sort of co-CEO conversation and what the meaning is behind that for you when you are approaching some of these conversations that we have together, whether it's around feedback or ideas or pitching the other one. What does that look like for you?
One of the big challenges for me is, as you know, I'm highly rational, and I just look at a problem and I look at the solution. Here's a problem. What are the set of solutions that we can employ to solve this problem? When it comes to work, I don't really engage my emotions around the work that I'm doing very often. So I can come across really cold. I get frustrated oftentimes because I am concerned with how that might land in our relational dynamic and find myself hesitating or slower to bring things that need to get done. And as a result, my judgment is that the business suffers because I'm hesitating, I'm not saying the things that need to be said, where in a working environment, I wouldn't do that. I would not hold my tongue and I would just say, hey, listen, we got to get these things done. And I often work with a lot of men too. Now, historically, I've worked with a lot of women. Historically, I was trained by women. I worked with a lot of women. I've had a lot of female mentors, and so it hasn't always been that way. But the truth of the matter is, the female mentors that have trained me were also very much that way. One of my greatest mentors, her saying was, "They'll love you when it's done." In other words, she could be really brutal to people at times, but knowing that the work that we were doing was so meaningful that when people got to the end of that work and experienced the benefits of what that was, they would all stop and go, "My God, I'm so glad that you pushed me." And inevitably that had been true. I saw that over and over. So I learned from both women and from men who came from that perspective.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And when I am reminded of that, and occasionally I started to point out to you, I'm like, I think you're used to talking to men all day, because
And
that.
that is accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But I also know that you were brought up with, in particular, the earlier years of your career, you were brought up with almost exclusively female mentors, and it's interesting to hear you frame it that way in terms of the kind of brutal nature sometimes that they could come with. For one thing, I think that in general, that can be looked upon more harshly when women show up in the workplace that way. So there can be a lot of judgment around that. But then for me, I'm just naturally not that way. So it's harder for me to relate to that. And I also, while some of my work is very much about thickening my skin in a variety of ways, including professionally, like how we're talking about here, it's I don't want to show up like that, like the way that you're talking about, because that's not true to me. So how do I also find the balance to meet you in what you are more accustomed to, and can also be wildly effective, while also maintaining my own unique way of doing things that is warmer and is a little bit more emotional. Um, but the emotional piece is tricky because it's like, okay, there's a time and place for like the more personal side. There does have to be some form of compartmentalization on my part as well. To your point, yes, I'm not going to do it quite the way that you do, and I don't think that either one of us have the expectations for me to do that. But it is really beautiful to hear you share where you come from, because it does allow me to have more compassion about the approach that you take, and to just not take it quite as personally because of that.
Yeah, and I think that there's probably, that's just kind of, say, still a surface level of what is, what that means to me. I think that there's something deeper about the importance of success and what it means to sacrifice success and who I'm sacrificing that for. And dignity being the thing that is heightened by my success. So when I'm successful, when I do well out in the world, then I feel better about myself. I feel a greater sense of self, and that bolsters me against anything else. So when I'm sacrificing success, I'm also sacrificing a sense of self. So for me, there's always been a get it done at whatever cost. If you have to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't feel good, who cares? You're going to get it done. So if I'm not doing that, if I'm not achieving that level of success, if I'm not getting things done, or I'm allowing things to get in my way, then I have a lesser sense of my own dignity, of who I am. That Oh, I allowed this obstacle to get in my way. Who am I? Look at me.
Interesting. Yeah. So that really strikes at your sense of self when you are not pushing through on the thing, including times where it involves coming to me to do something about our shared business. And that really starts to chip away at your sense of self.
Yeah. How am I allowing this to happen?
Mm.
How am I allowing there to be failures in my life? I've faced so much adversity, and I don't let that stand in my way. And so if I'm allowing that adversity to stand in my way in our dynamic, if I'm allowing our emotional challenges to stand in the way of success in business, then am I really the person I claim to be?
And that's a big one to sit with. That's massive because that can really shift how you and I both know that however you feel about yourself, not just you, but in general, however one feels about themselves is going to have a, a massive impact on the relationship, the personal relationship as well, which is huge.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just to add one more piece of this, I'd say that there's another layer underneath, which is, that's kind of what drove me early in our relationship. I wasn't in the strongest position in business in our early relationship, and I felt as though I couldn't really show up to be your partner in this relationship if I wasn't succeeding. And still, to a degree, there's a piece of me that if I drop that, if I lose what I've created so far, then I won't be the partner that I want to be. So it really pulls at that essential element of self and of who I desire to be in relationship. And I think that piece being tied into the relational dynamic, my success in my work is inevitably very much tied into how I perceive myself as a partner.
That is massive.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. That one's hitting me. Um, there's something else that you have shared with me about success. If you're open to, I mean, it's a little hard for because I'm like, you don't know what I'm about to say, but I'm like, will you share with us? um, you tied in with that is that you've also talked a lot about success and what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love for you to speak on that as well, because that ties in a lot with what you're saying about you also showing up as the partner that you want to be too.
Having a clear idea of where I want to go, having a clear vision of what success looks like to me. But at the end of the day, if I'm standing there by myself on top of this mountain, it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't exist. We only exist through the reflection of others. And we only truly exist, my belief, through the reflection of others that we deeply trust and admire. And so our partner, our deepest intimate partner, that person who sees us, who really gets to see all of the parts of us, good, bad, and indifferent, when they get to reflect back that experience, that's what actually makes it real. And so I would say on the outside, of course, I'm doing it for my family and all of those things, but really from a selfish standpoint, I'm doing it so that I'm not alone and that it actually is real. It's not a figment of my imagination.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, that is basically actually what I was going for. But you've also shared with me specifically certain moments, even as recently as a week or two ago, we had a conversation, and you were talking about the fact that the success, I do all of this not just for yourself and the family and whatever, but that you do it for me in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that if I can't receive and hold that, then you don't feel like you have succeeded in the same way. Those weren't your exact words, but Does that land for you?
Yeah, it does. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'm kind of two minds when it
Mhm.
comes to that, because I hear this from my clients a lot. I work with a lot of men who are high achievers, and struggling with their relationships, and inevitably, each and every one of them says, "I'm doing it for my family."
Mm.
And that's not always as true as they want it to be. I'm gonna be really honest. So many of them are doing it because they love the fight. They get lit up by the fight, and so do I. Right? We get lit up by the challenge. We love having our back up against the wall and having to face a big mountain. And so sometimes making our lives more challenging, it gets more exciting to us. And we have to be really honest about that and not just say, look, I'm doing it for you. That's
Mhm.
my ego talking, I think. There's a part of that is true. That is, I am doing it so that we can have a life together that feels really fulfilling. And if you don't feel fulfilled in this life, you're not experiencing it the way that I'm experiencing it, goes back to that reflection piece, then what's the point?
You're still standing alone on
I'm
the
still
mountaintop.
standing alone on the
Mhm.
mountaintop, right?
Yeah.
I would love to say that I'm completely altruistic and I'm doing it for,
Wouldn't we all?
for the family and for you and all of these kinds of things. But I need to get out of my way and be honest about it.
Mhm.
It is really selfish in the sense of my achievement, my providing for my family, my reaching that mountaintop is how I reflect back to myself that I've done something in this world and that I mean something to this world. And that matters. There's nothing wrong with that, but I can't lie and say that I'm doing it for you.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate the clarification because I do think that that's important. And, similarly, I, my part of figuring out my role and how I show up is also largely about me. And I get my defenses up because I also, my identity is very closely tied to showing up a particular way, to being seen a particular way, but also to feeling a particular way myself, like from within. And feeling successful to me means doing work that is meaningful to me in the world. And if I'm not doing enough of that, or if I'm not showing up fully for that work, then I feel like I'm losing a piece of me. And similarly, I have sat with this a lot lately, the areas where I then don't feel like I'm being the partner that I want to be for you. Not just the partner that I think you should have or deserve, but I'm not measuring up to the idea that I have of who I am and who I want to be for me and for you and for us.
Let's get to that thing, meaning.
Mm.
When you say if I'm not doing something of meaning,
Mhm.
what's the for lack of a better term, meaning? How do you use that word what does that mean for you when you say if I'm not doing something of meaning?
My I my work, relational work, is it lights me up. And you get to witness the part of me, like, when I come upstairs after, like, an incredible coaching call, I'm on fire. Like, every part of me feels alive. And that is not my only source of meaning in this world, but it is a significant part of it.
Mhm.
And when I don't do enough of that, typically I'm also then not doing quite as much to fill myself up in all of the other ways too. So it just naturally tends to decline kind of across the board. And uh, it, it's it is what helps me to bring aliveness back to us, not just to me, but also to our relationship and to you. And when I don't show up for that enough for a variety of reasons, up to and including self-sabotage, which is an entirely different podcast episode,
Mhm.
then I start to lose those parts of me, and then I start to become a version of myself that I don't always love.
Mhm.
And yes, those parts of me get to have acceptance and stuff too, but that doesn't mean that that's the version of me I want to become, or live in all the time.
So what I hear underneath that is purpose work.
Yeah.
When you feel that you are engaged and successful in purpose, then you are more lit up.
Yes, very much so.
What's really interesting to me about that is when we're in partnership and we have two different people, two individuals who have purpose that sits outside of the relational dynamic. And yet the success or lack of success in that purpose has a direct impact on the relational dynamic. As you said, you're lit up or you're not lit up. And I think that's one of the big challenges is how do I allow my partner to have their unique individual experience when they may be struggling with what they define as their purpose work. And that struggle then impacts the relational dynamic or vice versa. How do we navigate that in a relational way, recognizing that there are absolute parts outside of the relational dynamic that are still impacting the relational dynamic? What are your thoughts around that?
It's a difficult question because to me, there's always going to be parts outside of the relationship that impact the relationship.
Yeah.
Like you can't control that. That's just not life.
Yeah.
You can support your partner to do more of the work that brings them such a deep sense of purpose and encourage and whatever you can offer in that way. But you can't. Not only can you not control the external circumstances, you can't control them.
Of course
to
not.
do the thing, right? So it's a difficult one.
Yeah. Well, I think that the challenge that I see is if I identify with that and say, oh, they're going through a tough time, I'm going through a tough time as a result, then we often say that only one person can be dysregulated in the relationship at one time, right? So if I allowed myself to take that on, then it's not supportive on one level to the relational dynamic. But if I don't allow myself to take that on, if I say, okay, that's them having their problem over there, then that can come across as being cold and distant in the relationship, which can also cause a separation dynamic in the relationship that can pull the relationship down. And so it's a fine line to walk through in navigating how to address that. I can be supportive. Sometimes that supportive can come off as patronizing. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts around like that delicate dance, and how do we show up when there's that piece isn't being fulfilled for one or other person in the relationship?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is to get curious. Ask them. Like ask your partner what it is that they are most needing, and that also requires them to take some responsibility for it as well, rather than, this isn't necessarily what's happening, but rather than sitting around waiting for their partner to come and do something specific, like support them, but don't patronize them, and all of those things. It then it becomes to me more of a co-created team effort, or at least provides the opportunity for it to become more of a co-created team effort, where the partner who is perhaps doing just fine in those areas of success doesn't feel like they're going to always misstep. If they at least are getting curious and having those conversations and seeing what would be useful, what would be effective, I think that that's a big step in the right direction.
Interesting. So getting curious as always,
As always.
and really trying to find out what your partner needs, which isn't always,
They don't always know.
they don't always know.
No. That's why I was like, it's a start, but
Yeah. They don't always know. Giving them space to have their experience, I think, is an important piece. But how much space is the tricky challenge.
Yeah.
Too much space can create abandonment, can create that sense of we're not together. Not enough space can feel intrusive. So it can be very difficult to navigate that logistical piece. And I think that there's also a part of this that is more of a modern challenge.
Sure, because historically, women were not even working, right?
Yeah,
Is that
if
what
go,
you mean?
Well,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
if you go that far back, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I wasn't even thinking that far back. I
Sure.
just, is even, in the last, how much our roles and responsibilities have shifted. Talk about the 50-50 relational dynamic. This thing that came along, it was just in my generation that it became a more of a norm of a 50-50 dynamic between parents, right? That there was a shared expectation in most things in the house. Shared expectation around finances, shared expectation around raising children, shared expectations around chores and responsibilities around the home. And that's a relatively new concept that we take for granted because I was raised in it, you were raised in it. Most of the people out there who are listening to this were probably raised in it. And people just 20 years older than me were not.
Yeah.
My parents were not.
Yeah.
And so this is a big shift in our cultural dynamics that we're just now coming to grips with. So I think it makes perfect sense that we haven't figured this out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that traditional relationship, obviously there was an inequality. As we say, and separate is not equal. This idea that, one person bringing in the financial ends ultimately created an inequality. And that inequality created a power dynamic that our parents' generation fought against. We had mothers, both of us, that were very adamant about earning their own way, not having to rely on a man. And these are the things that we grew up with. And this created this need for a 50-50, which then creates also an inherent power dynamic. And I'm curious if that plays into some of the dynamic as well. Asking you as a woman, because it is a uniquely different experience being socialized as a woman than being socialized as a man under these set of expectations.
And you mean under like the business lens?
Well, both the business and the personal lens, because I think they overlap.
Yeah.
There's always been an expectation as a man that I'm going to meet a certain business expectation, that I'm going to provide,
which comes with
protect.
its own weight of heavy responsibility as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
There's always been that expectation. Now there's additional expectations that I'm also supposed to take care of the kids and conclude all those things, which I'm not fighting against all of those. I'm just saying that's been a shift. But the primary shift, I think, has been in the expectation that women are experiencing in your generation, and my generation as well, from their mothers, I'd say predominantly, somewhat from their fathers as well, of what it means to achieve and to meet your partner at a certain level.
Yeah, and a lot of women I know are also the primary breadwinner.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes accidentally. It wasn't even necessarily, planned. That just kind of happened. Her business took off and it just happened that way. I don't have the personal experience of being the primary breadwinner in my last long-term relationship. we split everything 50-50. And in our relationship right now, you are more of the primary breadwinner. We're both still working, but you are by far taking, carrying the bulk of the weight of that particular role. And yet I don't like it. And this is the part that I still grapple with. And I want to be clear. I do like it. And this
You can be honest with it.
No, but it's
tension.
both. It's both and. Like when you first came to me and said that you felt actually really strongly that you actually wanted to take over that role, I was a little bit apprehensive, but then I realized that it felt like my nervous system was taking an exhale. Like that I didn't even know I'd been holding my breath around. And I've spoken to a lot of women who also feel similarly, who even if they haven't gotten to have the privilege of personally experiencing that, they talk about how amazing that would feel to have that weight taken off. And not for me and from a lot of the women that I talk to, from the place of, oh, great, I'm no longer going to work. So this is the difference, is because I still very much want to work. That did not remove any of my ambitions, but it also gave me, in our particular situation, it has given me a lot of breathing room during a very intense period of transition that took a lot out of me.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, though. Is there part of that reads as a lack of belief in you and your abilities? In the sense of me coming to her and saying, and does that continue to play out in the sense that the lowering of the expectation leads to a belief that maybe they don't think I can do it?
Yeah, for sure. I to a degree, not a huge amount with you, at least not initially. But I think that as time has gone on from that initial presentation of, I'm not sure. I think that some of it has translated for me as a little bit of a lack of belief in me, but it's more so the reflection that I'm holding up to myself of, I thought that I would be creating more financially at this point. And it's more a disappointment in me than it is a lack of belief from you. If I look at it more surface level, it can feel like a lack of belief from you. But when I go underneath it, it's much more about me. It's like 1 or 2% about any perceived lack of belief from you and all of me.
What's that story about you then?
For one thing that I have had come up is fear that I would lose my sense of ambition, that I would get lazy, basically. And judging myself when I have taken time to not push as hard during certain parts of this period of time when I felt like I should have. So it's an enormous privilege to get to live in this space of being like, I can fully trust that I will have a roof over my head, a beautiful one at that, and food on the table, and that removes a lot of pressure. But then there's a little part of it is dissipating actually, but there have been periods where I have had a lack of self-trust where it's like, oh, I'm going to lose my edge. Like if I allow myself to be cared for, I'm going to lose what has kept me sharp.
So it's almost like lowering the standard, lowering the expectation lowers the standard. And I may get complacent in a lower standard and lose my edge. It's really interesting because there's an argument around race dynamics and affirmative action. And there's been I have different thoughts about this argument, but it plays out similarly in the idea that if we lower the standard for people of color to enter into college or whatever it may be, then the message that they receive is they're not as capable. While intentionally trying to make it easier, we're also saying we believe that you need it to be easier because you're not as capable. And so there's a message that gets conveyed that, yeah, I want to make it easier for you, which also might be conveying that I don't believe that you're as capable, and it's okay. Don't worry. We'll lower the standard. We'll lower the bar. That way you can feel a sense of achievement without having to achieve as much.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that type of comparison, and you have such a strong background in DEI. It's really interesting to hear you bring that up because that is interesting. And the interesting thing is that it also ties in for me with this whole trad wife movement.
Oh, the trad wife.
Do you know I just read the other day that apparently Anne Hathaway has bought the rights to a book that is about a trad wife influencer who is then she pushes that lifestyle. She is then transported to the year 1855 to actually live it. And the comment section, I was dying. It was like millennial women. Anne Hathaway knows what millennial women want to read about, what we want to see, because there is this huge push towards that, and in that, getting to be provided for and all of those amazing things that are such a gift, and I feel deeply privileged to receive, and I don't really want the other side of it though.
Yeah, I don't think any women do. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Even when you're saying, I want the trad wife, I don't want trad wife in the traditional sense. I want it in a new evolved sense.
Modern.
A modern
Yes.
evolved sense. I think that that's what most people are really saying.
No woman
when
wants
they
to go back to 1855.
No, it's like, it's like saying as a black man, like, yeah, I want to go back to 1855. Things are simpler. Hell no.
Absolutely
We're not simpler.
No.
This is fucked up. No, I don't. I think that, one, I just think that Americans have a really poor sense of history. Don't really truly remember things that were that old. There are elements of it, I think, that we are acknowledging, and this goes back to that idea of the 0-100 relationship that evolved into the 50-50 relationship that is evolving into the 100-100 relationship. And in order to move past the 50-50 dynamic, we are going to take on some of those traditional aspects of relationship. The 100-100 means that I take responsibility for all parts of this relationship, but that doesn't mean that I take responsibility for doing each and every part of this relationship. We're going to find that our roles play to our strengths, that our roles play to the things that we do well and the things that light us up, and that we don't have to do the things that don't light us up and that don't bring us joy. But the freedom to do the things that do bring us joy, that do light us up, I think is really what the movement is more about. And so I think when a lot of women are talking about going back to being a trad wife, they're saying that I don't really want to be this uber competitive person. I don't want to compete in that world. I want to be in my feminine flow. I want to be connected to my emotion, to what feels real and feels alive. And I don't want to be working in that particular energy.
Well, here's something else. Let's bring it back to the business for a second. So when we're talking about all of these different dynamics that are at play when we are then coming together, when you and I are coming together to create a shared business, and a lot of the couples that we work with also work together and have businesses both separately and together. And then if we look at that concept, it's like, how is that power dynamic then playing out? So what is it that is going to create, and how do we get clarity on who does which role? These are the conversations that you and I are having right now, is what do each of us do best? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are the challenges? And how do each of us fill particular roles so then the business also gets to thrive as a result of that without leaving gaps? And in relation to that, I saw this thing the other day that I think is really interesting about how something that we are drawn to in our partners, especially initially, is like me, for example. I am drawn to, in some ways, the more integrated, obviously, the very masculine parts of you. But there is a little part of me that's also drawn to the integrated version of the feminine in you, which is like the being in touch with your emotions and emotional intelligence and care and consideration and all of those things. And you being drawn to, yes, all of the feminine version of me, but in the integrated masculine, the part of me who gets shit done, actually like does and goes out and does the thing. So how do we incorporate that into the unique roles that each of us take on too? Because it's not just all one or the other. And I don't believe, and I know that you don't either, that there's just this like, we're all one thing or the other. We have both.
Yeah.
It's more a matter of how integrated those versions are. And then how do we incorporate that into, okay, I'm going to take this role in the business and you're going to take this role in the business. And then we can, find ways to communicate and get things done in a way that keeps both of us happy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The yin and yang, right? There's a little
Yeah.
bit of this and a little bit of that in each one of them. We're not all one of these pieces, and each of us gets to live into that. And I think really what's underneath it and the deeper part of this is in the 0 to 100 relationship, one aspect of the relationship was not valued and extremely undervalued. And that, I think, is the core piece that needs to be healed, both for the masculine and for the feminine. Because what we have done in the 50-50 relationship is all we've done is overemphasize the importance of the masculine role. And if you want to have success and achieve, then you need to be in the masculine role, because that's the thing that will bring you success in this life. And I say the masculine role, I mean, again, we are all, like you said, masculine and feminine within ourselves. But the cultural prioritization around getting shit done, earning a certain amount, doing these things was given a lot more value. So to fix that, we said, well, then you need to do all the things that are given more value, as opposed to saying, hey, these things have value too. And as long as we only see a certain set of the responsibilities as having value, then there's always going to be an inherent inequality. We had this go on in our dynamic. You talk about this idea of feeling sometimes when we're in with couples, your only role and responsibility is to be the
golden retriever.
the golden retriever, right? Which, to me, I'm trying to communicate that has tremendous value. That the emotional tone that you set in the room and the safety that you create for our clients creates an enormous space for the work that I may be doing at certain times, really going deep and really kind of, giving them the gut punch. But they feel safe with the gut punch because of the space that you hold. And while it might not be as obvious, it is incredibly important. That, I think, is the part that needs to be healed in our relational dynamics in order for us to really be in partnership, is to truly value what both partners bring rather than valuing one part more than the other.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And what I will add to that too is that I think that for me, one of the things that I've noticed is I am still valuing more of the masculine type of qualities
That's what I mean, yeah.
than like if I held it, and this is what I'm working on. If as I begin to hold my own unique gifts in higher esteem and to truly better understand the impact that they have, which they do. And I am given feedback about that a lot, independent of you. Like in my own business, I'm given that feedback a lot. That is when I get to feel, and it is shifting over time. I am starting to feel more secure within those qualities. But I hadn't realized until you and I started running into all these issues and bumping into these issues how little I was valuing those qualities
Mm.
in, in comparison is kind of
Mhm.
the issue, in comparison to some of those more culturally idealized
Mhm.
qualities.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I realized just how much that was ingrained within me
Mhm.
as it became obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I say it's healing that both within the masculine and within the feminine,
Sure. Yeah.
which is how do we collectively hold the less seen aspects of what each other are contributing to the relationship as incredibly valuable,
Mhm.
and alleviate the competition around the ones that might feel more traditionally um, rewarded as the measurement of our success independently so that we can be experiencing success collectively as a team.
Yeah. And, just to give one last example, like when we're working with couples, you and I want you to run with this. I encourage you to run with this because you are an absolute rock star at conflict resolution. Like when shit is getting heated, I'm like, whoo, there's a lot happening right here, and I'm just gonna let him do his thing because you get in there. You have 2 decades worth of experience with conflict resolution, and I am more the expert in the repair, which is a little bit more, it can be, not necessarily, but it can be a little bit softer. It's not quite
Mhm.
as heated. It's,
Mhm.
it's the emotional reattunement
Mhm.
to each other and the deepening and the depth and the connection. And part of that is as a result of the conflict resolution.
Mhm.
And, they feed into each other. It's a
Mhm.
synergistic system. But I think that, again, because repair can tend to be, not always, can tend to be quieter and a little
Mhm.
bit more peaceful and a
Mhm.
little bit more calm. I have not been giving myself as much credit when you and I are in the same room together
Yeah.
as to the importance of the repair.
Yeah.
But the conflict resolution does not keep a couple together.
Mm.
You need both.
Sure.
You can't have one without the other, and you can't have the repair without the conflict resolution because
Sure.
otherwise, you're trying to pretend it's sunshine and rainbows. You're painting over all the shit that hasn't actually been resolved yet.
Yeah. I would simplify that to the doing and the being.
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it.
And we live in a culture that exemplifies doing and overlooks the value of being.
Hmm.
And I would say that I receive so much guidance from you in being, where I've lost because I'm focused on the doing. And I know on a deep level that that's not going to get me to where I want to be. But on externally, that can look tremendously successful, but it isn't. And I think that that is a large part of the polarity that we attract in our partner. We have a partner who is stronger in doing, and we have a partner who may be stronger in being, and we get to learn from each other in those aspects to create the partnership that we really want to have.
Hmm. Yeah, and vice versa. I also feel that, I have both, but that I think that you were stronger in doing. You were like, good, you're done. And I have lots to learn about that because sometimes I can just get lost in, like whatever it is I'm doing, whatever flower is attracting my attention at the moment.
And I definitely need to stop and smell the roses. There is, I would not really experience life if I didn't.
Yeah,
So there's our yin and yang,
complimentary strikes.
love and practice.